Please listen carefully.
Hey, so one thing that I was thinking recently is, whether, as far as my approach, whether you're polishing your skills to be this super sub, or, just deepening your songwriting, or maybe, settling into a very specific genre. I just wonder, is there value in broadening the scope of your musical styles and genres, that you explore and learn?
Yeah, I definitely think there is. So, yeah, we're going to spend some time exploring that today. Hi, I'm Paul Frields.
I'm Dave Guzman.
And welcome to Practical Bass, where every week we pick a topic of interest to you, the working bass player, and we unpack it and delve into it and sort of explore some of our experiences and maybe try and pass on some advice and also encourage some feedback from you, the listeners. We really want to hear from you. You can find us on the web at practicalbass.com. Hopefully you're listening to this because you are subscribed to the podcast. If you are not subscribed already, then definitely go do that. You can find links on the website at practicalbass.com, but you can also locate us on Facebook, on Twitter. You can find us on Google Plus and on Instagram. You can also find the podcast directly on iTunes. You can find us on Google Play Music and on Stitcher Radio. So if you have any of those apps or the podcast app on your Apple phone, simply open up one of those sites and search for Practical Bass, and you can subscribe directly through the site. We deliver a new episode to you every week. And it seems like this week is a perfect time to talk about broadening your music genres. What genres do you play in now, Dave? And what are the areas where you've spent time learning or delving into that?
Well, right now, as I've mentioned in past episodes, I'm currently playing in, a Beatles or classic rock cover band, which is, kind of a genre, in itself. And then my other project is an all original, it's just writing mostly, but indie rock. I guess that's a pretty broad area, but
broad but good.
Lots of freedom, which really speaks to this, because the indie project for me, it incorporates, there's just these, it gives me the opportunity to thread in some of these other genres that I've really spent time with, which is, for me, funk, salsa, samba, punk, some of the chordal stuff on bass, reggae, cumbias, reggaeton, some country. I mean, just like
it's
anything.
Really, like you're really kind of incorporating like everything that you've heard. You're bringing that together.
Yeah, it's like a stew, stew of all these different. A gumbo, exactly. And that, I think that speaks to the spread of genres that I've really spent time around. Not that I'm, a pro at any of them, but, some I've spent more time delving into.
Sure.
I mean, I think in addition to that, other areas that I've spent time with, which are usually based on projects that I've done, bluegrass, like, certain areas of 80s rock, Afro funk. There was a period there where I got into that, of course, pop, some hip hop, disco, the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole spectrum. And the great thing is you find, there's so many great players. There's so much good bass to be found out there in all these styles of music.
Yeah, there is. And so what about your genres right now? Like, what are you playing in, and what are some areas you've gotten into?
Yeah. So I've got a few projects going on right now. One of them is, I guess I call it kind of Texas Roadhouse blues style, and it's a combination of originals and covers.
Yeah.
And, it kind of delves a little bit also into sort of like 70s hard rock like that,
right.
Kind of like long hair, without getting, too into like, I don't know, Southern or classic rock, but it's more like
gritty.
Yeah. Bringing that grit and that, the dirt, into the rock, which I really like, but soulful.
Right. Yeah.
And then another one is really focused on 60s and 70s, funk, R&B, and soul.
Yeah.
So, like the Johnny Guitar Watsons and, Bobby Caldwell,
Yeah.
Sly and the Family Stone, Parliament, stuff like that.
Right.
And then finally, I've got a new project that I've been working with some guys focused on pop music from the 70s and 80s that's influenced by the Beatles.
Huh.
So maybe a bit towards the new wave side, but definitely like the songwriting that got influenced out of the 60s. So these are guys that, they were in their 20s and 30s in the 70s and 80s, and they were writing, based on what they'd heard, in the British invasion and, especially from the Beatles.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, on top of that, I listen to, and, my spare time, I try and play in a bunch of other genres as well. Modern R&B. I listen to that quite a bit just to kind of make sure I keep up what's going on. Modern pop the same way, even though a lot of that is very slick produced, sometimes there's no, actual bass guitar on it, but hearing what's going on there and hearing the, what the keyboards are covering and, being aware of those trends is important. Jazz and swing a little bit. I used to be really into swing.
Yeah.
In college, I ran sound for a swing band, and I still love listening to that stuff. Hip hop, a bit of progressive. Like a lot of bass players, I kind of cut my teeth on progressive rock because there's the guys that you idolize as a young player,
Right.
And and also country, other edge of the dial country, which I think is where a lot of the good songwriters have gone. Have gone to country in the 2000s.
Yeah,
you still hear a lot of amazing stuff there.
And country is interesting on bass because there is something like it's touch, and that even when it seems so simple, you can miss it so hard.
Yeah, and it really is just you're trying to be locked in. I mean, that's the thing. Country is so polished, and I'm sure part of that is post-production, but the quality of the players is just, it's something that everyone should emulate because, you're really supporting a song, right? As opposed to trying to be like, hey, this is me, like this amazing player.
Yeah.
Listen to what I can do.
Right.
So that's a lot of genres, I think, that we talked about. A lot in common too, and a lot that around the edges that maybe not so much.
Yeah.
When you're looking at gigs, right? Whether it's you're recording or you're gonna do a show or whatnot, what do you feel like that diversity gives you that's good for a player to have?
I feel like there's a few pieces that it adds value to. And one is, if you're really looking at a specific genre, let's say that you're playing, a certain area of funk, and you if I dive into it and if I really explore it and I really learn, I get deeper into it. When I'm at the gig or if I'm at the recording session or if I'm, just playing with musicians, I feel like if I know that genre deeper, I'm avoiding the whole like fake it till you make it thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do have to go that route, but if someone calls out a genre or says, this is what I'm looking for in this song, and to be able to have that in your back pocket, like, okay, it's not just like the 1-5, but there are other things that I can do with this.
Right.
I think that's one of the bigger values. It just becomes more believable, and you can, add to that. Now, on the other side of that is that if you're writing bass lines, I feel like it'll really help you fuse different styles and genres that maybe weren't even supposed to be, they're just so far apart from each other.
Yeah.
But if you can do it delicately, because if you know the genre well enough, sort of those tiny little things that make it that style.
Right.
And you could just peel apart little pieces and then add it in.
Yeah.
And that creates sort of like a somewhat of like a juxtaposition in terms of style and texture, almost like genre bending. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to drop names or anything, but so there was a group that I was working with some years ago, before they moved to Nashville, the Hummingbirds, and there was a song that they were working on at the time. I honestly can't remember the title, but I really enjoyed the song.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that the drummer and I, at one point, were working on building up an arrangement.
Right.
And we had kind of this feel that, when they brought it in, it was very, straight ahead kind of acoustic folk.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I don't know, like Graham Parsons kind of thing. And
Yep.
we sort of brought in this, it was almost like kind of a bossa nova feel, not over the top, like straight, in the genre, but just there was a certain inflection to the way that we played through the bar.
Yep.
And completely changed the way that everyone was executing the song, and just gave it just a little lift. It wasn't anything that we planned, but being able to call on that difference just sort of like it lifted it up and it made it unique. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not just another, straight ahead acoustic folk. It was like there was a difference to it, and it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, because when you, from a listener standpoint, I mean, I love hearing something that I'm just trying to like put my finger on. What are they doing? And it's not like the notes or whatever. We could figure that out. You could slow it down. You can look at the notes, but stylistically, like, how did they come up with that, or what are they doing? And then to, most listeners that, especially if they're not musicians, they're not going to get to that point. But when you can kind of unwind it and then realize like, oh, they put a little bit of this in there.
Right.
Like that was that one ingredient,
right.
It was a little bit of cumin in there, or whatever that piece is. Yeah. And the last, I think the last piece that it does for me is that it fuels my learning process. Like, I think as a musician, a lot of us are just curious. It feeds the desire to continue to learn. And, sometimes I'm just learning genres just because maybe the genre doesn't excite me. Maybe it's not my thing, but I just want to know like what's behind that door, or what did some musician do? Like what brought it there, and to get as close as I can to that experience. Like I think, if I'm learning someone's bass lines, I want to get to as close as it was to be them to have played that.
Yeah.
Like I might change it. I might never do it, but I want to at least like for a nanosecond, like feel what it was like, what it's like to find that bass line.
Yeah. You want to be right in that space. And because if you do that and kind of digest it, it becomes a part of your playing from then on.
Exactly.
Right? Something that you can call on. Yeah.
Exactly. So what do you feel, that this whole like diversification of genres brings to your experiences, to your gigs?
Well, so, I mean, I definitely come at it from a bass player, and I feel a lot of the same things that you do. I really connected with how you described this, but, maybe another angle as a songwriter, I like to appreciate the different idioms for how songwriters work and how songs work in different genres. I mean, it can be even something as simple as like the way the bass moves to anchor the chords that are common in that genre. Right. Like you have the 1 6 minor 4 5, which you'll find, all over the place in pop music. Right. Yeah. Sometimes they move where the bar, like where the beginning of the phrase is, but that's super common. And then on the other hand, you go to R&B where it's like, the 2 minor 5 1, which is all over the place as well. And, those are great things to be able to pull out of your pocket. There are tons of other more complex or more idiomatic uses that you find in these other genres, and being able to get used to them and then be able to pull them out as a tool in songwriting. I really like to be able to do. And that, I think that also kind of informs my playing a bit. Right. So, as a player, I'm listening to the technique and the idioms that the bass player is using to get around those changes. Yeah. Right. And so that helps me learn how a bass part in that genre tends to move, right? So is it swinging, right? Does it swing a little bit? Does it stutter, right? Are there a lot of ghost notes? Is it slinking around through the line? Like, is there a certain thing about the tone plus the note choices that makes it kind of like slink through the bar in a certain way? Or, does it kind of just like barge its way through like a bull in a china shop, or something like that?
Yeah. And how you're interacting with everybody else, all the other pieces.
Yeah. And listening to how that interplay is going on with the drums and how is it, what amount of space is there, right? How much space is left for the other instruments? How much space is left for the singer? Is there a lot of times where the bass is not playing, and how is that placed in the bar?
Yeah.
Right. All those things learning how great players in each of those genres works is it's like endlessly interesting.
Yeah.
You just hear these creative people at work, and it just, like you, I think it just like, it stokes the fire, right?
Yeah.
Right. Even if I don't like, that may not be my favorite genre, but when I hear those players working in it, right, that gets me really excited, right? Hearing somebody do something really creative.
Yeah. And when you unlock it, like when you hear it, you start to discover it, and then you apply it to your bass, and then it becomes obvious.
Yeah. Like how do you do that? How do you do that unlocking? How does that work for you when you're trying to learn something?
Yeah, I guess, whatever I'm approaching, there has to be some excitement around it. Like, it's got to pull me in, right? And so that might be, for me, like, that starting point is, I don't know. I like vinyl. So, I might have a record that of a musician that I've never heard of or whatever, and I put it in, and it pulls something out of me. Or sometimes I just realize, like, okay, this is a genre I just need to do. I got to like draw the line, say, all right, I'm doing this. Let me explore whatever this is. And that's sort of the starting point of where it gets it going. And then, it's just listening and listening and listening. So hopefully, if there's a desire to want to learn a genre, I'm studying it first. I mean, it's not so methodical, but I'm studying it in a way that it's on my it's on my phone, it's in my car. I'm just getting inside as much as I can. I also look at, of course, covers are probably the most common way to get into a genre.
Right. Like, you have to learn it for a gig because it's on the list.
You got to learn it for a gig. Right. Exactly. And I guess, one of the things, like, if there's really, if there's an area that I really want to get into, it's not just sort of like finding, maybe I do find that one record or that one musician or that one genre that I want to get into. But it's discovering the subgenres under it, like doing a little bit of research and figuring out, like, where did this start? Like, what were the roots of this song, or who are your classics? Like, who are those standards that you should be looking toward?
Like, here's the giants in that genre, whatever they are.
Right. And it might be, a simpler form of whatever brought you in, but it's critical because that's part of that learning process. Just kind of getting into those subcategories, like, an example is, I've done some of the Latin music stuff, and eventually ended up in cumbias, which is based out of Colombia. It started in like the 40s or 50s. It died away, and then in the 60s, there was like a psychedelic piece that crept in. So then you have I think it's called like chiche, and it's psychedelic cumbia, like getting all the way down to that, where you can, pull in all the history of it, changes how I approach, that style that I can fuse in. And making sure that you look at some of the key ones, like, for example, if you are, I'm not an expert in this area, but like, if you're doing new wave, if that's something that's important, like, you should get into like Duran Duran, right?
Oh, yeah.
You start with like, John Taylor, and then maybe get into, what is it, like Japan, Mick Karn.
Yeah.
and get into some of the the deeper ends of it,
right?
And not necessarily learn all their lines, but just know what exists out there. Where it was,
and hear how they execute, right? Because it helps you be authentic, like you were saying earlier,
right. And so, what do you look at?
Well, so I have satellite radio in my car, which is it's a nice thing to have, and even though there are like finite playlists for most of their channels, they do it seems like they kind of re-up quarterly. Like you'll get a new shipment of things that they license or whatever.
Yeah.
At least quarterly. So often what I'll do is I'll tune it to a random channel. I mean, not super random, but like something where, like I'm going to go listen to some new wave today. Right. So I'll turn it to that channel. And I'm going to listen to that for like the next week or whatever. And just try and pick up what's going on in the bass. A lot of the songs that they play, were probably, bigger, right? They were hits. They were well known.
Sure.
And those are the things that you're probably in a lot of cases going to end up picking up in covers. And even if you don't, you're going to get a really good cross section of what was happening in that genre on the bass.
Right.
Over 100 songs, you get a pretty good idea of how that works. It's not, I guess I wouldn't call it ideal, because surprisingly, the sound quality on satellite radio is still not that good. I mean, it's better than terrestrial radio, but I'm amazed that this is probably a whole conversation on its own, but just a little tangent here. I'm really shocked and disappointed at the fact that the technology is like it's chosen or set up in a way to give you music that still does not sound that good. And it doesn't have to be that way. Right. It's just a lack of care and quality. But anyway, that's a personal gripe. But, it sometimes makes it a little harder to pick out the bass parts, but it is what it is. Right. Another thing for me is, the 20 songs or albums you should hear, like those listicles, right? The list / articles you see on the internet. Oh, here's something you should listen to in this genre.
That's right.
I'm not ashamed at all about going out and searching for some of those things to pull in new things to hear. Yeah. And, just get started. Or sometimes I'll even pick a genre that I know pretty well and just see, is there anything on here that I haven't heard or don't know and that I missed out on somehow, and just plug up those cracks or whatnot.
No, I completely agree.
Since I play, I play by ear, I know you do too. I know a lot of people who do, not everyone does. I think, some people will learn by, mechanically through tablature, through reading music. Right. I tend to do it by ear. And so for me, what works best is hearing those songs or hearing, the work in that genre for a while, and kind of digesting it with my brain before I pick up the bass to try and do it. Because I know if I know more solidly what I'm trying to aim for, then it makes it easier for me to imagine how I'm going to execute it on the bass, right? And get the sound that's living in my head already.
Right. Yeah. And still there's so many genres for me that I haven't explored in any depth. I mean, and I just wonder, like, why isn't, like, what genres have we not gotten into individually? And, what's the reason behind that? So, like, for you, Paul, like, what are some genres that either you're just getting into for whatever reasons, or like what haven't you gotten into at this point?
Well, so yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that. I mean, it leads me right into like a softball. That's like a softball question. There was
You're
something
welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. We're professionals.
Super pro.
Super pro. I mean, this leads right to a conversation that you and I had not too long ago about Latin music, right? One of the things that I'm always fascinated by in your playing, right? I'm fascinated with your band and the way that you play, because you clearly have like this deep, a deep grounding in Latin, Afro-Cuban. Like there's a lot of styles that I don't know that I hear in your music, and I really want to learn that. It's something I've never really taken time to get into. But it's like, there's such a rich bass tradition there. Yeah. And, so we talked about this earlier. I hopefully going to get from you at some point a starter list, right? Of here's
Right.
like the classic recordings, here's like 20 or 50 or whatever songs that if you can sort of get into these, right, it's going to give you a gateway
Yeah.
into learning, that kind of broad genre of music. That's something that I'm kind of excited about. I actually started reading about clave.
Yeah.
Just it's all academic at this point, right?
Right.
But sitting there and kind of looking at some of the notation and kind of beating it out with my hands, dun, 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 or the other way around, like
Right.
where the twos at the top or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I know these rhythms because I've heard them used elsewhere, but I'm hearing them through a filter of something else on their way to that genre.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard the original, right? I haven't heard the origin of that. And that's kind of what I'd like to get into.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
So, I mean, what about you? Is there something that you have not learned or are making a conscious effort to learn now that, that you haven't previously?
Yeah, I think I have a tendency to I get overwhelmed like with certain genres, right? Because they're just so big. I actually avoided classic rock for a long time because it just seemed like, where do I even start? And so, I joined a band that played classic rock. That seemed like a pretty good starting place. But I think there's definitely some areas. I mean, I haven't spent time with classical. I've spent a lot of time with jazz, but I'm just not anywhere where I think that the time that is really needed, that I'm putting in. I mean, I just feel like it's a miss for me.
It's so deep on its own. I think that it's funny you mentioned that, and I don't want to break in too far here into your thought pattern, but that almost seems to me to still be one of the biggest and maybe last remaining gaps between types of musicians and players.
Right.
I don't see a big gap between like R&B and rock or pop and country or country and even metal, right? There is not a big gap. Where I do see a gap is between, I guess what you would call more popular music in terms of, maybe the appeal or the commercialism and the jazz side, right? Jazz is so broad and so deep and so revolutionary. And there's so many ways that it's gone unto itself. It's almost like putting it in a list of other things where you say like, oh yeah, pop, rock, country, and jazz. It's like, no, actually all those other things are kind of like, if you add all those other things up, they are kind of approaching the size of what jazz is.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes it so, overwhelming. I mean, it's just, there are just so many areas of it. But I think like most musicians, even if you're not even if you don't admit to playing jazz, it's just one of those things that you just keep falling into.
Yeah.
In your quiet space.
Yeah. Yeah. As you explore, you can't help but kind of touch it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's not ever like you really reach a point with any genre that you're like, all right, that's done, moving forward. But,
I know all that. I'm done.
Yeah. But there's definitely, some genres that you go deeper into than others. Some are more relevant, to your bass world or your bass business, and some are more closely related to what your personal tastes are that pull you in. But most recently, one of those genres that's been out there that I've been listening to, but not really spending time and understanding it, for me has been the the electronic side of the house.
Yeah.
House music, also like R&B, more the contemporary side of it. So, just popular stuff like, Daft Punk and, R&B guy like Anderson .Paak. Or
I love Anderson .Paak.
There's a new one, Case Renata, like some of the DJ guys, where they're, there's just so many, there are great bass lines in there.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been, a genre in itself to sort of explore that electronic piece. And sometimes they're bass, sometimes it's actual bass on the track.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My main man, Nathan East, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was featured on the Daft Punk
Right.
Random Access Memories.
That's right.
Album.
Yeah.
I mean, that was him and Get Lucky, and Nathan Mace is my number one dude.
Yeah,
Like,
and
I
that
want
is
to be him.
That is an amazing. I just love that stuff, and even when you get into some of the more electronic stuff, where it's, I mean, it's not bass, like an actual bass guitar, but can you emulate that? Can you do that so that you could pull something like that out on stage?
Absolutely.
That's been, for me, that's like a new area that I'm into right now. Like that's my world currently.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it really is not just about, only playing the things where you hear what you do in the music, but how can you change yourself, or how can you, in your playing, kind of adapt into that style or make yourself sound like that?
Right.
Right. And that's a tool in your toolbox.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, that's the kind of thing that, really takes people to the next level, in their gigs, right? We talk about that here a lot, right? How do you elevate your gigs? And that's one way to do it, is know these different genres and not being afraid to explore.
Yeah.
Well, so that seems like a good place to wind up for the day. We really appreciate you guys listening to us, and we hope that you've found this, if not enlightening, then maybe affirming, or maybe it's piqued your curiosity about some of these different genres, or about broadening your own genres for a better chance at working the gigs that you want. We would love to hear from you, and we would like to hear about your experience in genres, what you have branched out into, what you're still looking to branch out into, and maybe some ideas for things that people should check out. Are there some genres or some very specific pieces that fans of the podcast might want to go listen to? We'd love to hear that stuff from you. If you contact us on Facebook or on Twitter, on Google+, you can even find us on Instagram. We would love to hear some of that feedback from you, the listeners, because it's all about having a conversation, right? It's not about just us talking about what we do. We want to hear what you do. You can also find us at the website practicalbass.com, where you will find an archive of our previous episodes. You'll also find all our previous episodes and a new one each week, exploring a new topic in practicality for you, the working bass player, because that is our mission. That is our goal, to help you elevate your gigs and gear. And you can find the podcast on iTunes or the Apple Podcasts app on your phone. You can find us on Google Play Music or on any platform, on Stitcher Radio. Just open up the app and search for Practical Bass, and you will find our little black and white bass icon. And we hope that you will consider subscribing and listening to the podcast weekly, and then letting us know what you think. We'd also love to hear ideas from you guys about subjects that you'd like us to cover in future episodes. And we'll see you next week for another interesting topic, we hope. And until then, I'm Paul Frields.
I'm Dave Guzman.
And this has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening.
The guy he's got a great execution, visual sense, but the guy has no sense of emotion or restraint or anything. It's all
right.
Blam, blammity blam, ow.
Right.
It's all the time. He's like Michael Bay, who's my daddy.
Right.